In a military career that has spanned nearly 3 decades, you get used to difficult phone calls. You get the 3 a.m. call that yanks you from a deep sleep into the cold, stark reality of a developing international crisis. You get the call from a subordinate officer with bad news from the field, a voice tight with a grief you know you'll have to carry for them. You get the call from the White House, the one that makes the hair on your arms stand up. I've taken all of those calls. I've learned to compartmentalize, to keep my voice steady, to let the training take over. But there is one call that no amount of training can ever prepare you for. The call that cuts through all your armor, all your discipline, and finds the soft, vulnerable human being you keep hidden underneath. It came on a Tuesday. I was in my office at the Pentagon, a sterile, windowless room that felt more like a bunker than a workspace. I was reviewing logistical reports for a troop deployment to Eastern Europe, my mind 1,000 miles away, deep in the weeds of supply chains and readiness levels. My secure line buzzed, a special tone reserved for a handful of numbers. I looked at the screen. It was my younger brother, Michael. I picked up the phone. "Mike." "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. He never called me on this line unless it was an emergency. There was a choked, ragged sound on the other end. "Eva," he said, his voice cracking. "It's Dad. He's gone." The words didn't compute at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. Gone, where? "He had a heart attack this morning," Michael sobbed, at his desk. It was massive. He was gone before the paramedics even arrived. And just like that, the world tilted on its axis. General Eva Rostova, commander of thousands, a woman who had advised presidents and faced down foreign adversaries, vanished. In her place was just Eva, a daughter who had just lost her father. The reports on my desk blurred into an incomprehensible mess of words and numbers. The sterile air in my office suddenly felt thin, suffocating. My relationship with my father, Colonel Richard Rostova, U.S. Army, retired, was not a simple one. It was a long and complicated war, fought with love and resentment as the primary weapons. It was a war that had begun the day I told him I wanted to follow in his footsteps. I was 18 years old, sitting at the same dinner table he had died at. I had just been accepted to West Point. I was bursting with a pride so fierce, it felt like it was going to split me in two. I was going to be a soldier, just like him. I thought he would be thrilled. He was not. I can still see the look on his face. He put down his fork, his expression a mixture of shock, pride, and a deep, profound disapproval. "West Point," he'd said, his voice quiet. That's a fine institution, Eva. A fine institution for young men. And young women, Dad," I had replied, my own voice full of a naive, youthful confidence. "I want to be like you. I want to serve. Being a soldier is not a game." "Eva," he'd said, his voice hardening, "it's a hard life. It's a dirty life. It's no place for a woman, especially not for my daughter. You should be going to a nice university, meeting a nice young man, thinking about a family, a real life." A real life, as if the life he had chosen, the life of service and sacrifice he had supposedly been so proud of, was somehow less real for me. My mother, a woman who had spent her entire life navigating my father's moods, had tried to smooth things over, now. "Richard," she'd said gently, "if this is what she wants, it's not about what she wants," he'd thundered, his fist hitting the table. "It's about what's right. She has a brilliant mind. She could be a doctor, a lawyer. To throw that away to go play soldier in the mud, it's a waste." That was the first battle in our long, private war. I had won. In a sense, I went to West Point. I excelled. But every achievement, every promotion, was another skirmish. He was proud. I knew he was. But his pride was always tainted with a bitter resentment. He had wanted a daughter who would admire his career from a safe, civilian distance. He had not wanted a daughter who would join him on the battlefield and prove to be a better soldier than he had ever been. The rift between us deepened with every stripe I added to my sleeve. I made lieutenant colonel faster than he had. I was selected for the War College, an honor he had been passed over for. Each of my successes felt like a personal failure to him. The final, fatal blow to our relationship had come 5 years ago. I was a freshly promoted brigadier general, the youngest in my class, my first star. It was the proudest moment of my life. I called him from my new office, the phone feeling heavy and strange in my hand. "Dad, I have some news," I'd said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I've been promoted." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of the television in the background. Promoted to what he'd finally asked, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "Brigadier General," I'd said, my own pride turning to ash in my mouth. Another silence. Then he'd said, "A general's life is all politics. Ava." All handshaking and smiling for the cameras. The real army. The one I served in. That army is gone. You're a politician in a uniform now. Don't expect a congratulations from me for that. And he had hung up. He had never once called me general. He had never acknowledged my rank. To him, I was still just Eva, the daughter who had made the wrong choice, the daughter who had, in some way he could never articulate, betrayed him by succeeding in his world on my own terms. We had spoken since then, of course, stilted, polite phone calls on holidays and birthdays. We talked about the weather. We talked about my mother's garden. We talked about my brother Michael's job as a high school history teacher. We never talked about my life, my work, my world. My career was a silent, unacknowledged continent between us. Our last conversation had been an argument, a bitter one. I had been home on a rare leave and had tried, foolishly, to bridge the gap. I tried to tell him about the work I was doing with NATO, about a new strategy for combating cyber-terrorism. He had cut me off. "I don't want to hear about your new age, push-button army." He'd sneered, "In my day, we fought with guts and grit, not with computers. Your day is over, Dad." I had snapped, my own patience finally breaking. The world has changed. The battlefield has changed. And whether you like it or not, I am one of the people in charge of it now. The look on his face was one of such cold, profound fury that it had taken my breath away. "Don't you ever," he'd said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "take that tone with me in my own house. You may be a general to the rest of the world, but in this house, you are nothing but a disrespectful daughter." I had left the next morning. That was 6 months ago. We hadn't spoken since. And now, he was gone. There would be no more chances to fix it. No more chances to bridge the gap. The war was over, and there were no winners, just casualties. "Ava, are you there?" Michael's voice, small and broken, pulled me back to the present. "I'm here, Mike," I said, my own voice hoarse. "I'm here. I'll be on the first flight out tomorrow morning." "Okay," he whispered. She's a mess. She needs you. She needs me." The words felt strange. For years, they had made it very clear that they did not need me, that my presence was an inconvenience, a complication, but now, in the face of death, the old rules were suspended, or so I thought. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, my mind a chaotic storm of grief and regret. I mourned the father I had loved, the brave, honorable soldier he had once been. And I mourned the relationship we had never had, the approval I had craved and had never received. I stood up and walked over to the small, framed photo I kept on my credenza. It was the only family photo in my office. It was of me and my father, taken on the day of my graduation from West Point. I was in my crisp, gray dress uniform, my face shining with youth and pride. He was in his full dress uniform, a colonel's eagles on his shoulders. He had his arm around me, and he was smiling. But if you looked closely, if you really looked into his eyes, you could see it, the shadow of the war that was to come, the pride, fighting a losing battle against the resentment. That was the man I had lost. That was the man I was going home to bury. And I had no idea that my family, in their grief, was about to deliver the final, most brutal wound of all. The flight home was a ghost ride through my own past. Every 1,000 feet of altitude we gained, I seemed to sink deeper into a sea of memory. I remembered my father teaching me how to ride a bike, his big, steady hands on the handlebars. I remembered him quizzing me on military history at the dinner table, a proud gleam in his eye when I knew the answer. And then, those good memories would be swamped by the others, the cold silences, the dismissive remarks, the unbridgeable gap that had opened between us the moment my own career began to eclipse his. By the time I landed and drove the rental car to my childhood home, my grief was a tangled, thorny knot in my chest. This house, the one I had grown up in, felt like a foreign country. The manicured lawn, the perfectly symmetrical shrubs, the American flag flying from the porch, it was all a picture of perfect, orderly family life. A picture I had been written out of long ago. My mother answered the door. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, her face a mask of weary sorrow. When she saw me, she didn't rush to hug me. She just seemed to shrink a little. "Iva," she said, her voice thin and reedy. "You're here." I came as soon as I could. "Mom," I said, stepping inside. The house smelled the same as it always had of lemon polish and my mother's faint, floral perfume. My brother, Michael, was in the living room, sitting in my father's favorite armchair as if he were laying claim to a throne. He was a high school history teacher, a gentle, bookish man who had always been overwhelmed by our father's military bearing and my own. But now, in his grief, he looked different. He looked hard. His eyes, when they met mine, were not filled with shared sorrow. They were filled with a cold, simmering resentment. "Michael," I said, nodding to him. "Eva," he replied, his voice flat. "You shouldn't have come." The words, so stark and so immediate, struck me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" He was my father. Was he? Michael shot back, his voice dripping with a bitterness I had never heard from him before. "You were never here, Eva. You were in Germany, or Korea, or God knows where else in the desert. You were a name on a postcard, a stilted phone call on Christmas. Dad was here, Mom was here, I was here. We were the ones who took him to his doctor's appointments. We were the ones who had to listen to him rage about the world. About you. Have you ever been punished for someone else's inability to handle the truth? My father couldn't handle my success, so he had raged. My brother couldn't handle my father's rage, so he was now turning it on me. I was the lightning rod, the designated target for a lifetime of family dysfunction. "That's not fair, Mike," I said, my voice low. "My job required." "Your job," he laughed. A short, ugly sound. "Don't you dare hide behind your job. You loved it. You loved being away. You loved being important. You loved being a general more than you ever loved being a daughter or a sister." My mother started to cry softly. "Boys, please," she whispered. "Not now." But her plea was weak, without conviction. I took a deep breath, trying to access the calm, command presence that had served me so well for my entire career. "I am not going to fight with you. Michael, I am here to help. I am here to mourn my father. We need to make the arrangements. He's a retired colonel. He's entitled to a full military honors funeral at Arlington, if that's what he wanted. I can make the calls. I can handle the logistics." I was trying to help. I was trying to use my skills, my position, to honor him in the way I knew best. But my brother saw it as another power play. "No," he said, his voice sharp and final. You will not call anyone. You will not arrange anything. This is our family's business, not yours." "He was my father, too," I said, my own voice finally cracking. "Was he?" Michael stood up, his face contorted with a grief that had curdled into pure rage. "Then where were you 6 months ago, Eva? Where were you after your last fight with him? The fight that put him under so much stress. The doctors said his heart couldn't take it. There it was, the accusation, the unthinkable, cruel, and utterly unfair accusation, that I had killed him, that our final, bitter argument had been the cause of his fatal heart attack. It was a monstrous thing to say, a desperate attempt to assign blame for the senselessness of death. "That's not true," I whispered, the words barely audible. "You can't possibly believe that." "It doesn't matter what I believe," he said, his eyes cold as stone. "It's what he believed. He was so angry with you, so hurt. He told Mom, he told her that he didn't want to see you again, that as far as he was concerned, he only had one child left." My mother sobbed, a confirmation of the words. It was a knife, twisting in my gut. "So, Mom and I have been talking," Michael continued, now the self-appointed executor of my father's bitter will, "and we've made a decision. It's what he would have wanted." He paused, and in that moment, I knew what was coming. I felt the world tilt. the floor dropping out from under me. "We've decided," he said, his voice a low, steady, and brutal pronouncement, "that it would be better if you weren't at the funeral." The words hung in the air of that quiet, lemon-scented living room. They were so monstrous, so completely outside the realm of human decency, that my mind refused to accept them. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice a hollow echo of itself. You're banning me from my own father's funeral." "We're honoring his final wishes," Michael said, his face a mask of self-righteous grief. "Your presence would be a disruption, a dishonor to his memory. All you ever brought this family was conflict. Eva. We are choosing to have a peaceful service for the family who was actually here for him. The family who was actually here for him." The words were designed to sever, to amputate me from the body of my own family, and they had succeeded. I looked at my mother, who was now weeping into her hands, a portrait of spineless sorrow. She would not defend me. She would not stand up to her son, or to the ghost of her husband. She would just cry, and she would let it happen. I felt a strange, cold calm descend over me. It was the same feeling I got in the middle of a firefight, when the chaos is absolute and the only thing you can do is focus, act, and survive. The grief was still there, a massive, gaping wound, but now it was surrounded by a wall of ice. I looked at my brother, this small, bitter man who was trying to use my father's death as a weapon to finally win a lifelong sibling rivalry. I looked at my mother, this woman who had chosen her husband's resentment over her daughter's love, and I knew that I was well and truly alone. "I see," I said, and my voice was so calm, so devoid of emotion, that it seemed to startle them. "You've made your position very clear." I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't plead. I had commanded armies. I had faced down enemies with guns and bombs. I would not be broken by these two sad, broken people in their quiet suburban house. I turned and walked to the door. "Where are you going?" my mother cried out from behind her hands. "I'm going back to my hotel," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "As you've requested. I will not be a disruption. I will not attend the funeral." I walked out the door and didn't look back. I got in my rental car and I drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. The pain was so immense. It was beyond tears. It was a physical pressure in my chest, a hollowness so vast it threatened to consume me. Banned from my own father's funeral. It was the final battle in our long war. And it was a battle I hadn't even been allowed to fight. They had declared me the loser by default. They had stripped me of my right to mourn, my right to say goodbye, my right to be a daughter. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the fluorescent lights humming over the empty tables. I sat there for hours, watching the sun go down, my mind a blank. Silent landscape of shock and grief. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally, definitively, put me in my place. They thought their decree was the final word. But they had forgotten one thing. I was not just a daughter. I was a general in the United States Army. And a general never, ever, surrenders. They had banned the daughter from the funeral. But they couldn't ban the soldier. Have you ever been so hurt that you just go numb? It's a strange, merciful state of being. The pain is so immense, so all-consuming, that your brain just flips a switch. It encases the wound in a thick, protective layer of ice and detachment. You can function, you can breathe, you can walk and talk, but your heart, your soul, is in a state of suspended animation. That's where I lived for the next 2 days. In the sterile, anonymous silence of a hotel room just outside of Washington, D.C. I didn't leave the room. I ordered room service that I didn't eat. I stared at the cable news without seeing it. My phone was a dark, silent rectangle on the bedside table. My family didn't call, and I had no desire to call them. What was there left to say? They had drawn their battle lines. They had delivered their final, devastating volley. I was no longer a daughter. I was a casualty of a war I hadn't even known we were fighting. My mind, the analytical tool that had served me so well for 3 decades, kept replaying the scene in my parents' living room, my brother's face, contorted in a grief that looked so much like hatred, my mother's silent, weeping complicity, my father's ghost. a more powerful and destructive force in death than he had ever been in life. I had faced down insurgents. I had navigated the treacherous political minefields of the Pentagon. I had briefed a room full of world leaders with the fate of millions resting on my words. But this raw, intimate, familial cruelty had broken through all my defenses. It had found the one, tiny, unprotected part of me that was still just a daughter. And it had shattered it. On the third day, the numbness began to recede, and the pain started to seep in through the cracks. It was a vast, hollow ache. The grief for my father was now inextricably tangled with the grief for the family I had just lost. I knew I couldn't stay in that hotel room. Adrift in my own sorrow, I needed an anchor, a tether to the world I understood, the world where I wasn't a failure, but a leader. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the contacts. My finger hovered over a name. It was a name I hadn't called in months, but he was the only person on earth who I knew could possibly understand the strange, bifurcated world I lived in. He answered on the second ring, Chaplain O'Malley. His voice was the same as it had always been, a calm, steady, Irish baritone that could soothe the most rattled soul. Father Michael, I said, my own voice sounding strange and distant to my ears. Eva, he said, and there was a sudden warmth and concern in his voice. I heard about your father. I am so sorry for your loss. He was a fine man, a fine soldier. Father Michael O'Malley had been a chaplain in the army for 40 years. He had served with my father in Germany back in the 80s. He had presided over the memorial service for one of my own fallen soldiers in Afghanistan. He understood the complex intersection of God, country, and family better than anyone I knew. Thank you, Michael, I said. The tears I hadn't been able to shed for 3 days suddenly started to well in my eyes. How are you holding up, General? He asked gently, using my title not as a sign of rank, but as a sign of respect for the burden I carried. And for the first time, I let the wall crumble. I told him everything. My voice was low and disciplined, recounting the facts of the situation, but he was a man trained to hear the story beneath the story. I told him about the final argument with my father. I told him about my brother's accusation, and I told him that I had been banned from my own father's funeral. He listened without interruption. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the line. I could hear him breathing, thinking. That is a heavy cross to bear, Eva, he finally said, his voice full of a deep, profound empathy. A very heavy cross. I don't know what to do, I whispered, the admission of helplessness feeling like a betrayal of my own character. They don't want me there. They said I would be a dishonor to his memory. Let me ask you a question, he said. Who is it that they have banned? Is it Eva, the daughter, or is it General Rostova, the soldier? The question caught me off guard. What's the difference? I think, he said gently, that there is a world of difference. Your family, in their grief and their anger, have passed judgment on the daughter. They are trying to punish the daughter for a lifetime of family pain, real or imagined. They may have the power to do that, but they have no authority, none whatsoever, to pass judgment on the general. They have no authority to prevent a fellow soldier from paying her respects to a fallen comrade. His words were a life raft in the middle of my swirling sea of grief. He was reframing it. He was giving me a new lens through which to see my duty. Your father was two people, Eva. He continued. He was Richard Rostova, your father, a complicated, proud, and difficult man, with whom you had a complicated, proud, and difficult relationship. And he was Colonel Richard Rostova, a man who served his country with honor for 30 years. You have a duty to both, but they are not the same duty. Your family's decree, he said, his voice firming up. It applies to the daughter. It is a matter of the heart, a matter of family conflict. But your duty as a soldier, as a general officer in the United States Army, to honor a retired colonel at his passing, that is a matter of the uniform. It is a matter of the flag. It is a matter of the code. And no family drama can ever supersede that code. Never leave a fallen comrade behind. The line, the bedrock principle of my entire adult life, echoed in my mind. My father and I had been on opposite sides of a long, personal war, but we had worn the same uniform. We had sworn the same oath. We were comrades. He was so angry with me, I said. The memory of our last fight still a raw wound. I have no doubt that he was, Father Michael said. And I have no doubt that he loved you fiercely, in his own broken, soldierly way. The anger of a father does not cancel out the honor owed to a colonel. The pain of the daughter does not negate the duty of the general. We talked for another hour. He didn't tell me what to do. He just held up a mirror and showed me the two women I had become, the daughter and the general, and he helped me understand that they could, and must, exist separately. When I hung up the phone, the numbness was gone, the pain was still there, a deep and profound ache, but it was no longer a paralyzing fog. It was a clean wound, and my mind, my strategic, analytical mind, was clear for the first time in days. My mission objective was no longer about my family. It was not about winning their approval or fighting for their acceptance. That war was over. My new mission was simple: to honor my father, the soldier. I stood up and walked over to the window of my hotel room. The world outside was gray and cold, but it looked different now. It looked like a field of operations. My family had banned the daughter, and I would honor that. I would not approach them. I would not speak to them. I would not ask for their forgiveness or offer my own. I would not cause the disruption they feared. But the general had a duty to perform. I made a decision. A calm, cold, and resolute decision. I would attend the funeral. I would not go in my dress uniform. That would be a provocation, a declaration of war. I would go in a simple black civilian dress. I would stand in the back, under a tree, far from the family plot. I would be an anonymous mourner, a silent, respectful observer. I would watch the ceremony. I would listen to the eulogy. I would say my own private goodbye to the complicated man who was my father, and then I would leave. It was a clean plan, a plan that allowed me to fulfill my duty as a soldier while respecting the boundary my family had set for me as a daughter. It was a way to honor him without dishonoring myself. I opened my suitcase and took out the simple, black sheath dress I had packed. I hung it on the closet door. I looked at it, and I no longer saw the dress of a rejected daughter. I saw the civilian attire of a general on a quiet, personal, and profoundly important mission. My grief was still a heavy weight in my gut, but for the first time since that phone call, I had a sense of purpose. I had my orders. The day of my father's funeral was cold and clear, with a sky the color of pale, washed-out steel. It was the kind of stark, beautiful winter day that feels like a crisp salute from nature. I dressed in the simple black sheath dress, a string of my grandmother's pearls, my only adornment. My hair was pulled back in a severe, tight bun. My face was a neutral mask. I was not a general today. I was not a daughter. I was a quiet, anonymous mourner. Let me tell you, there is no place on earth more humbling, more beautiful, and more heartbreaking than Arlington National Cemetery. It's a silent, sprawling city of heroes. The endless, perfectly aligned rows of white headstones march across the rolling green hills, each one a testament to a life of service and sacrifice. To stand there is to feel the immense weight of American history, the true cost of freedom, the petty squabbles and resentments of one small, broken family feel utterly insignificant in the face of such profound, quiet dignity. I arrived early. I bypassed the main entrance where the funeral procession would arrive and parked my rental car at a distance. Walking the final half mile, I needed the walk. I needed to feel the cold air on my face, to feel the solid ground beneath my feet. I needed to prepare myself for the mission ahead. My mission objective was simple: observe, honor, and exfiltrate without making contact. I found the designated gravesite easily. It was on a quiet slope, overlooking the Potomac River, with a view of the Washington Monument in the distance. A green canopy had been set up, with a small number of chairs for the immediate family. The honor guard was already in position, standing at parade rest, as still as statues. They were soldiers from the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, the best of the best. Their presence signaled that my father, despite our personal conflicts, was being laid to rest with the full honors he had earned as a colonel. A part of me, the soldier part, felt a surge of pride. I found my own position, my observation post. under the bare branches of a massive, ancient oak tree about 50 yards from the gravesite. I was partially obscured from view, but I had a clear line of sight. I was just another face in the small crowd of friends and distant relatives who had come to pay their respects. I was anonymous. I was invisible. I watched as my family arrived. The black limousine pulled up, and my brother Michael stepped out first. He looked older, smaller, his face pale and drawn. He helped my mother out of the car. She was draped in black, a veil covering her face, leaning on my brother's arm as if she couldn't stand on her own. My heart ached for her. For all my anger at her weakness, I knew her grief was real. She had loved my father for over 40 years. They took their seats in the front row, under the canopy. They didn't look around. They didn't search for me. In their minds, I wasn't there. I did not exist. The other mourners began to arrive. Old friends of my father's from his days at Fort Benning. Other retired officers, their backs still ramrod straight. Their faces etched with the memories of their own wars. Their wives. A sisterhood of women who understood the unique hardships of military life. I recognized some of them from old photographs, from stilted holiday gatherings years ago. None of them recognized me, the last time they had seen me. I was a gangly teenager with a rebellious streak, the woman standing under the oak tree, the one with the quiet authority and the sadness in her eyes, was a stranger to them. I listened to the quiet murmurs, the soft sobs. I listened to people share their memories of my father. They spoke of Colonel Richard Rostova, the brave officer, the demanding but fair commander, the man of principle. They told stories I had never heard. They were remembering a man I barely knew, my father, the soldier. The father I knew was the man who came home from the base, his face a thundercloud, his anger a palpable force in our small house. The man who corrected my posture at the dinner table, who criticized my grades even when they were straight A's, who demanded a perfection that was always just out of reach. We had loved each other, I know we had, but it was a love that was fought across a battlefield of his own making, a battlefield of pride and ego, and a deep, unshakable belief that his way was the only way. The military chaplain, it was Father O'Malley, I was relieved to see stepped forward to begin the service. His voice was a calm, steady anchor in the sea of grief. He spoke of duty, honor, country. He spoke of a soldier's sacrifice. He spoke of a life given in service to a cause greater than oneself. He was speaking about my father, but he could have been speaking about me. The words resonated in the core of my being, a familiar and comforting creed. I stood at attention under my tree, my hands clasped behind my back, my gaze fixed on the flag-draped casket. I was no longer Eva, the rejected daughter. I was General Rostova, a soldier at a comrade's funeral. And in that moment of profound, professional grief, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The service was brief. After the chaplain's final prayer, the honor guard NCO, a sergeant first class with a chest full of ribbons and a face carved from granite, took his position at the head of the casket. Present, arms he commanded. The 7 soldiers of the firing party raised their rifles in perfect, synchronized unison. Fire. The first volley cracked through the cold, still air, a sharp, violent sound of finality. Fire. The second volley echoed the first. Fire. The third and final volley rang out, the smell of gunpowder sharp on the wind. The spent casings were ejected, glinting like brass tears as they fell to the manicured grass. Then silence, a profound, ringing silence. From a distance, another sound began, the most beautiful and heartbreaking sound in the world. A lone bugler began to play taps. The 24 simple notes, so full of sorrow and honor, drifted across the silent hills of Arlington. It was a final, lonely farewell, a lullaby for a fallen soldier. I felt a single, hot tear escape my eye and trace a path down my cold cheek. I did not wipe it away. It was a soldier's tear, for a soldier's passing. As the last note of taps faded into the silence, the 8 members of the honor guard moved to the casket. Their movements were a marvel of precision and reverence. Every step, every fold, was a masterpiece of practiced dignity. They lifted the great flag from the casket. The stars and stripes held taut, a sacred canopy. Then, With a series of sharp, deliberate movements, they began to fold it. They folded it once, and then twice, lengthwise. Then they began the triangular folds, 13 of them, one for each of the original colonies. Each fold was perfect, precise. The flag was transformed from a large banner into a small, tight, blue triangle, the field of stars the only part visible. It represented the tri-cornered hat of the soldiers of the American Revolution. The sergeant first class took the folded flag from the team. He held it in his white-gloved hands, his expression solemn, impassive. And now came the moment, the final act, the presentation of the flag to the next of kin. I watched as the sergeant turned, my mother, her veil now lifted, looked up, her face a mess of tears, her hands trembling in her lap, ready to receive this final symbol of her husband's service. My brother Michael stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his face a mask of grim, self-important sorrow. This was the moment protocol dictated. The flag goes to the widow, but the sergeant didn't move toward my mother. He stood there for a split second, his gaze sweeping over the small family group under the canopy. Then, his eyes lifted. They scanned the small crowd of mourners standing behind them, and his eyes found me. They locked onto me, standing half hidden under the oak tree, and I saw it. I saw the flash of recognition in his eyes, a flicker of disbelief, quickly suppressed, replaced by an immediate, ingrained, an absolute understanding of protocol. Of a protocol that superseded the one in the handbook. A protocol that dictated the proper honors when a senior officer is present. My family, my brother, my mother, they didn't exist to him in that moment, to him. There was only one person of significance on that field of honor. He pivoted on his heel, a sharp, precise, military turn, and he began to walk, not toward my mother, but toward me. The sergeant first class held the folded flag against his chest. It was a perfect, tight triangle of blue and stars. My mother watched him, her hands clasped together, her breath held in anticipation. My brother, Michael, stood beside her, his expression one of solemn duty, ready to support his mother as she received the final symbol of her husband's life. This was the sacred, final moment of the ceremony, the transfer of a soldier's honor to his grieving family. But the sergeant did not move toward my mother. He stood for a moment, his gaze sweeping past the front row of mourners, his eyes, trained to see every detail on a battlefield, found me standing in the shade of the old oak tree. Our eyes locked for no more than a second, but in that second, an entire conversation took place. I saw the flash of recognition, I saw the flicker of disbelief, and I saw the immediate, unhesitating override of his training as a new, higher protocol kicked in. He was a non-commissioned officer of the old guard. He knew his duty, and he knew a general officer when he saw one, in or out of uniform. My mind was screaming, "No, don't do this. Just give it to her. Follow the script." I had come for a quiet, anonymous farewell. I had not come for a confrontation. I had not come for this, but my will had no bearing on his duty. He pivoted on his heel, a single, sharp, 90-degree turn, and with the slow, deliberate, and impossibly dignified pace of a funeral march, he began to walk. He walked away from my mother, he walked away from my brother, he walked across the manicured grass, his perfectly shined shoes making no sound, directly toward me. A confused murmur rippled through the small crowd. I could see heads turning. People were craning their necks. What was happening? What was this soldier doing? I watched my family's faces. My mother's expectant expression crumbled into one of pure, bewildered confusion. She looked at my brother, who just stared, his mouth slightly agape, as the sergeant continued his inexorable march toward the strange, unknown woman under the tree. My brother's face was a mask of dawning, horrified embarrassment. He thought this soldier had made a terrible, unforgivable mistake. He thought this was a catastrophic breach of protocol that was dishonoring his father and humiliating his mother. He had no idea that what he was witnessing was the absolute highest form of protocol being observed. The sergeant's walk across that 50 yards of grass felt like it took a lifetime. The world seemed to slow down. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the cold wind in the bare branches of the oak tree. He was the embodiment of the U.S. Army, a living symbol of the institution that had been both the source of my father's pride and the catalyst for his resentment. And he was bringing it all to me. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of me. His back was as straight as a rifle barrel. His face was an impassive, solemn mask. He looked me directly in the eye, and in his gaze, there was no confusion. There was only respect. Now, you have to understand something about military tradition. It's everything. It's the glue that holds the whole structure together. And the tradition of the flag presentation is one of the most sacred. It is a transfer of the nation's gratitude to the family. To divert that presentation is an act of almost unthinkable significance. It means that a higher-ranking military authority is present, and protocol dictates that that authority must be recognized above all else. The sergeant first class took one more step forward. He went down on one knee, holding the flag out to me in his pristine, white-gloved hands. The collected gasp from the mourners, especially from my family, was a sharp, audible sound in the stillness. This was not a mistake. This was intentional. His voice, when he spoke, was the formal, practiced cadence of 1,000 funerals. But his words were directed at me. On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, he said, his eyes never leaving mine, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your father's honorable and faithful service. My own body, my own training, took over, my hands, steady and sure, reached out and accepted the flag. The weight of it was both familiar and immense. It was the weight of my country, the weight of my father's life, the weight of my own. I brought the folded flag to my chest, holding it tight. The sergeant stood up. He took one precise step back. He did not return to the casket. He remained where he was, standing in front of me. And then it happened. His back, which I had thought was already as straight as a human spine could be, went ramrod straight, his chin tucked in, his hand, in a movement so sharp and so fast it was almost a blur, rose to his brow in the most perfect, textbook salute I have ever seen. And at the exact same instant, across the gravesite, the other 7 soldiers of the honor guard, as if connected by a single, invisible nerve, snapped to attention and rendered the same, perfect, unwavering salute. They were not saluting the casket. They were not saluting the memory of my father. They were saluting me. A stunned, absolute silence descended upon the cemetery. My family stood frozen, their faces a horror show of disbelief. My brother looked as if he had been turned to stone. My mother's face was a pale, blank canvas of shock. They were watching a scene that their minds could not process. And then, the sergeant first class, his salute still held perfectly, his eyes still locked on mine, spoke. His voice was not the quiet, reverent tone he had used before. It was the sharp, clear, and ringing voice of a soldier making his report, and it cut through the cold winter air like a diamond. General, ma'am, 2 words, just 2 words, and with them, my entire life, my secret world, the truth I had held silent for decades, was unfurled like a banner in the wind for all to see. General, ma'am, the title, the honorific, the undeniable statement of fact. It was a grenade that landed in the middle of my family's carefully constructed narrative and blew it to smithereens. I watched the comprehension dawn on their faces. It was a slow, agonizing, and brutal process, the confusion giving way to disbelief, the disbelief giving way to a dawning, horrified understanding. General, not a major, not a colonel. Like their father, a general, their daughter, the failure, the one they had banned. The 8 soldiers held their salute. They would hold it until I, their superior officer, acknowledged it and returned it. I stood there for a moment, holding my father's flag, the cold wind on my face, the weight of their shocked stares upon me. I was not the invisible mourner anymore. I was the highest-ranking officer present. I was in command. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my free hand to my own temple. My movements were crisp, sure, a lifetime of discipline flowing through me. I returned their salute. At ease, I said, my voice quiet, but it carried across the silent gravesite with the unmistakable ring of authority. The 8 soldiers dropped their salutes in perfect unison. The ceremony was over, my father's funeral had ended, and my own resurrection had just begun. In the ringing silence that followed my command, the world seemed to recalibrate. The 8 soldiers of the honor guard dropped their salutes in perfect, synchronous motion, their duty done. The sergeant first class who had presented me with the flag gave me one last, respectful nod before pivoting on his heel and marching back to join his detail. They moved with the quiet, dignified efficiency of men who inhabit a world of pure, unambiguous protocol. They had done their duty. They had honored a fallen colonel, and in doing so, had paid the proper respect to a living general. For a moment, no one moved. The small crowd of mourners stood frozen, their minds trying to process the scene they had just witnessed. Then, the spell broke. My family, my mother and brother, were still standing by the graveside, looking as if a lightning bolt had struck the ground between them. Their faces were pale, their expressions a mixture of slack-jawed shock and a dawning, horrified humiliation. They had come here to bury their patriarch and to cement my status as the exiled, failed daughter instead. They had become supporting actors in a play they didn't even know they were in. A play that had ended with my stunning, undeniable vindication. They started to move toward me, their expressions shifting from shock to a gathering storm of fury and confusion. My brother Michael took the lead, his face a thundercloud. I could see the questions, the accusations, forming on his lips, but he never got to me. Because another force field had just sprung into existence around me, one far more powerful than their family anger. The other military personnel in attendance, the old friends of my father's, the retired officers who had come to pay their respects, were now moving toward me. Their own faces were full of awe and a new, profound understanding. They had come to mourn a colonel, and had just discovered they were in the presence of a 4-star general. A retired 2-star general whom I vaguely knew from a NATO conference was the first to reach me. He didn't see Eva, the daughter. He saw the 4 stars I metaphorically wore on my shoulders. "General Rostova," he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble as he took my hand. "I had no idea, my deepest, most profound sympathies for your loss. Your father was a fine man, a patriot." "Thank you, General," I said, my voice steady. Another man, a retired command sergeant major with a chest full of ribbons, came up next. "General, ma'am," he said, nodding his head with reverence. "An honor to meet you, my condolences." One by one, they formed a new kind of honor guard around me, a protective circle of respect. They spoke to me in our shared language, the language of service, of duty, of rank. They shared brief, respectful memories of my father, the soldier. They offered their support. They created a polite, impassable buffer between me and my own family. I could see my brother Michael a few feet away, stopped in his tracks, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. He couldn't push through a group of generals and sergeant majors to yell at me. The rules of the world he had just stumbled into were older and more powerful than the rules of our broken family. His anger was irrelevant here, in this space, on this hallowed ground. My rank, the very thing they had resented for decades, had become my shield. I spent another 10 minutes speaking quietly with my father's old comrades. I thanked them for coming. I accepted their condolences. All the while, I could feel my family's eyes on me, burning with 1,000 unasked, angry questions. I did not look at them. I did not acknowledge them. I had been banned from their grief, and now, they were excluded from mine. Finally, I gave a last, polite nod to the 2-star general. "Thank you all for being here for him," I said, my voice carrying just enough for my family to hear. He would have appreciated this show of respect from his brothers in arms. I turned, the folded flag still held tightly to my chest, and I walked away. I did not look back. I walked past the rows of white headstones, each one a story, each one a sacrifice. I had paid my respects. I had honored my father, and I had, in the strangest, most unexpected way, found my own closure. The drive away from Arlington was quiet. The grief was still there, a heavy, aching presence. But it was a clean grief now. It was the grief for a father, a soldier, a complicated and difficult man whom I had loved. It was no longer tainted with the toxic, bitter poison of my family's judgment. The funeral, the ceremony, the salute, it had all been a purification. Burning away the resentment and leaving only the honor. My phone started ringing about an hour later. It was Michael. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let it go again. Then came the text. You need to call me. Now. What the hell was that? Eva. You made a mockery of Dad's funeral. A general? You're a general. You lied to us for years. I read the text and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just a profound, weary sadness for him. For all of them. They still didn't get it. They thought my secret was the betrayal. They couldn't understand that their judgment was the reason the secret had to exist in the first place. I didn't call them back for a week. I needed the silence. I needed to let the new reality settle, for them and for me. When I finally did call, I called my mother. Her voice was a timid, hesitant whisper. Eva. Hi, Mom, I said. We didn't know, she stammered. A 4-star general. Your father. He never knew. Yes, he did, Mom, I said gently. He knew. That was the problem. Your brother is so angry, she said. He says you were showing off. That you arranged that whole thing with the honor guard to humiliate us. I almost laughed. Mom? That was the United States Army's old guard. They don't take special requests. They operate according to a code of honor and protocol that has nothing to do with our family's drama. They did their duty. That's all. We want to understand, she said, her voice pleading. Do you, I asked, or do you just want an explanation that you can tell your friends? Do you want to understand my life? Or do you just want to turn me into a new, more impressive story? You can tell about your family. She was silent. I'm not angry anymore, Mom, I said. And it was the truth. I'm just done. The fight is over. Dad is gone. The relationship we had, all of us, is gone, too. If we are to have a new one, it has to be based on the truth. And the truth is, I am who I am. I'm not the daughter you wanted, but I am the woman I was meant to be. You all have to decide if you can live with that. That was months ago. The relationship with my family is a work in progress. It is a slow, awkward process of navigating a new world. They are learning to speak to me with a new, tentative respect. I am learning to enforce my new, ironclad boundaries. It is not warm, it is not easy, but it is, for the first time, honest. I have my father's flag. It sits in a beautiful cherrywood case on my mantelpiece. It is the centerpiece of my home. Sometimes, I look at it, and I think about the man who earned it. I think about the pride and the pain that defined his life, and our relationship. They banned me from his funeral. They tried to cast me out, but in the end, they gave me the greatest gift of all. They gave me the chance to say goodbye, not as the daughter he couldn't accept, but as the soldier he had, in his own complicated way, created. And I was able to receive his flag, the symbol of his life's service, not as a handout to a grieving dependent, but as a handover of command from one comrade to another. The war is over, my father is at peace, and so, finally, am I